Dopamine and serotonin are two neurotransmitters that have become increasingly more difficult to balance as our environment has become a dopamine-rich ecosystem. In this presentation, I'm going to present some of the positive contributions made by dopamine and serotonin to our lives. What happens when dopamine becomes dysregulated? And finally, I will explain some practices that can help restore balance. Neurotransmitters become dysregulated. And finally, some of the practices that restore balance. Dopamine, two neurotransmitters that have become increasingly more difficult to balance as our culture has become a dopamine-rich ecosystem where we are primed for immediate gratification. The implications here is that we're all vulnerable. Dopamine. Dopamine plays a role in how we feel pleasure. It's a big part of our unique ability to think and plan. It helps us strive, focus, and find things interesting. Like most other systems in the body, we don't notice it until we have a problem. Too much or too little can lead to a vast range of health issues, including schizophrenia, Parkinson's disease, and major depression. Some other issues associated with dopamine dysregulation are ADHD, obesity, as well as drug misuse and addiction. Today, we don't just use drugs that raise dopamine levels like nicotine, alcohol, cocaine, heroin, and meth. We have social media, texting, gaming, and fructose. These not only affect adults, fructose affects even infants before they are born. There is one pathway that carries both the dopamine feelings of pleasure and the feelings of lack and pain. The rise and fall of dopamine vary from person to person. If you eat a piece of chocolate, dopamine levels rise about 50% above baseline, and everyone has their baseline. Alcohol, 150%, and meth, 1,000%. When the dopamine levels go up, whatever goes up, we know has to come down. And so dopamine levels fall in proportion to the height that they reached. So if you had chocolate and you went 50% above your baseline, now you will go down 50% below your baseline. Alcohol will lift you up 150% and bring you down. And meth will lift you up 1,000% and bring you down 1,000%. When the dopamine falls, you feel pain, lack, and scarcity. After a big drive, whether it's a championship, the end of a semester, a big project at work, or doing something that you've never done before, the recovery time for dopamine depends upon the expenditure. It could vary from a few minutes to a few hours to a couple of days, and in the case of drug addiction, it could take as long as 90 days or possibly longer. Neurons like to be tickled. They don't like to be bludgeoned with chronic stimulation. It leads to neuronal death. The reason they die is because being a neuron is metabolically very challenging, demanding lots of energy. They cannot deal with overstimulation, so they die. To protect themselves, they downregulate the receptors. You have a neuron and it fires, and then there's receptors, and then they fire. It's like a bucket brigade putting out a fire. So they reduce the receptors. Dopamine has 4 major pathways in the brain. You notice that the yellow and the green and the blue, they're all coming out of the center of the brain. The center of the brain is the lizard brain. So it doesn't think and plan, it is instinctive and reactive. And when you have lots of dopamine, you see that yellow? That yellow represents your prefrontal cortex. And this is your executive function. This is the part of your brain that can regulate your behavior. And this part of your brain becomes dysregulated by high dopamine. And you end up asking yourself, what was I thinking? Well, you weren't, because you had a Pinocchio brain when your executive function and a lizard brain where it emanated from. And so you weren't thinking. Pleasure, we go up there, we get pain. And this always happens because there's one pathway. And you're either getting pleasure or you're getting pain, and there's no other options on that pathway. High levels of cortisol are always present with addiction. Elevated levels of cortisol are present when we are in a sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze. So we are more vulnerable to addiction, and when we are in a chronic fear state. This is like complex PTSD or PTSD in general. I'm a workaholic. It isn't the passion I have for my work that makes me a workaholic. It's the life and death urgency that I bring, increasing my cortisol and my dopamine levels as I start a new project. And I have to manage this just the same way as an addict manages their heroin or their meth addiction, because you can go through severe burnout, and I've been there, and I don't want to go back. Serotonin. While some serotonin is produced in the brain, where it performs primary functions, 90 to 95% of your serotonin is produced in your gut. There is another reason why fiber is important in our diet. While serotonin also has dedicated pathways in the brain, it is widely distributed throughout the whole brain. Serotonin is associated with the feelings of contentment, happiness, and joy. There is no known addiction to happiness. It's an abundant feeling, and there's neither a feeling of scarcity nor a driving need for more. While dopamine is excitatory, stimulating neurons, creating the need for them to adapt, serotonin is inhibitory. So you can't overdose on contentment, and there's no need to adapt. In a natural environment, serotonin is downregulated as dopamine levels go up. As serotonin levels fall, it creates feelings of depression. So you get a double whammy. You get whammy when the dopamine comes down and gives you feelings of scarcity and lack, and you get another round of depression from not having the happiness and contentment of the serotonin. And they have to be balanced, and that's the challenge that we face. You can't hold them steady. When you balance, I studied ballet, and one of the first things I learned is that Makarova doesn't just go up and hold her balance on the end of her toe shoe. She is feeling it in the slightest little nuance. And there is no perfect balance. It's a matter of adjusting when you move from the center. And every once in a while, you can see a ballerina, her ankle will barely move, and she's adjusting, because that's how you hold the balance until the audience claps. Dopamine is short-lived, like a meal. The serotonin is long-term, like a lifetime of beautiful memories. Dopamine pleasure is visceral. You feel it in your body, like a big kiss a win at a sports event, or eating lots of sugar. Happiness is ethereal, like contributing to a project like Habitat for Humanity. Pleasure is experienced alone, like a piece of chocolate or a drug. Happiness is achieved in social setting, like a birthday party. This is one of the reasons that 12 steps is so important in the recovery process. Pleasure is achievable by using substance and behaviors that drive dopamine levels up. And there are many of them, and they're increasing. There's no such thing as being addicted to too much happiness. Sugar. Now, I'm focusing on sugar. We have social media and telephones, that we carry with us everywhere we go. And they all touch our lives, but I believe that table sugar is the greatest challenge to our health, our happiness, our American democracy, our economic system, and the peace of the world. In 247 years ago, in 1776, when the American Revolution occurred, Americans consumed 4 pounds of sugar a year. By 1850, this had risen to 20 pounds. By 1994, it became 120 pounds. And the latest number ranges between 130 to 135 pounds of sugar per year. That's about 17 teaspoons, and 70 to 80% of it is hidden. It's hidden by salt, which causes a metabolic switch in the cells. Back in 1961, when I was taking baton twirling classes, I got a nickel for a 6.5 ounce bottle, because it only came in bottles then, of Coca-Cola that I could enjoy at the end of my baton twirling class. This was once a week. Soft drinks began to change in the early 1970s with the introduction of high fructose corn syrup. Today, you can have a big gulp, 44 ounces. This appeared in 1986, and the double gulp, 64 ounces, that appeared in 1989. And liquid sugar is the greatest assault to our metabolic health. When you see the words added sugar on an ingredient list, you do not know what kind of sugar was added. We have a right to know so that we can make a decision about what we put in our body. And this is a big political issue between big food and our government. Table sugar is a refined substance. What is cocaine? A refined substance. What is heroin? A refined substance. And refined substances don't have fiber, so they hit the brain, and they hit it hard. Table sugar is 50% glucose, and glucose is the preferred energy source for the body and the brain. But it also has 50% fructose, and it's 100% dopamine. Both sugar and fructose have been implicated in food addiction. High fructose corn syrup is sweeter than sugar, and this intense sweetness elicits a dopamine rush within 1/2 second of it touching your tongue. The dopamine rush not only gives you a Pinocchio brain, it also dysregulates 2 hormones in the body. These hormones control appetite and fullness. Ghrelin is one of them. It's made in your stomach and signals your brain when you are hungry. High dopamine doesn't turn it off. So you continue to overeat because you still feel hungry. Dopamine also dysregulates leptin. Dopamine dysregulates leptin and insulin. Insulin keeps us from feeling satiety. So we overeat and feel hungry, and we still have that hunger for more. Leptin resistance develops over time due to three primary factors: too little sleep, too much stress, too much wrong foods, and high insulin levels. Sugar affects us metabolically in another way. I recently listened to a podcast, and it was titled Mitochondria, the Key to Disease and Mental Health. And this was by Dr. Martin Picard, who is a metabolic researcher, and his focus is mental health. When I heard Dr. Picard say, mitochondria do not create energy, and I went, huh? I thought they created energy. And that's what I thought I learned in grade school. But what I learned is that the mitochondria takes the energy in the food that we eat and brings oxygen to it, and you have ATP, energy. You have the energy to think, to speak, to dance, to do whatever you want. But remember that fructose doesn't raise blood sugar levels. It doesn't trigger insulin. Initially, that sounds like a good thing, but it doesn't convert to energy. It does not convert, I take that back. It does convert to energy, but not the energy that we need for our body to function or to move. Instead of turning to ATP, adenosine triphosphate, it turns to adenine diphosphate and monophosphate. And this is stored energy. Fat is stored energy. And it's good if there's a famine. And that's why we are metabolically designed to produce it. Because before we started farming, and even after we started farming 10,000 years ago, we were always at risk of dying in the winter. But we don't need it today. Today, there's no famine. We can just go, to the grocery store and get whatever we want. Fructose is metabolized in the liver, but excess consumption can cause fat buildup, leading to insulin resistance in the liver and non-fatty liver disease. In 1950, the only people who got non-fatty liver disease were alcoholics. Today, the estimates vary. So the numbers vary from 7% to 25% in children, and 39 to 45% in adults, and it gets progressively higher as we get older. Is it chronic fear, the drop in serotonin from too much dopamine, or low levels of fiber in the diet? Or is it perhaps all of these that reduce our microbiome and to reduce cravings and to avoid the autoimmune consequences of too little fiber in the diet, like arthritis? We need to feed the gut and protect the liver. I see the brave, determined women in my Zumba class trying to exercise the pounds of fructose away. It can't be done because fructose doesn't burn. It's stored waiting for a famine. It's metabolically inert. It doesn't convert to energy. It can't be converted to ATP. And we feel tired, depressed, and hungry. Here are some strategies to support dopamine and serotonin balance. Let's go to the root of the problem and start with cortisol. Cortisol is always present in addiction, and you might ask why. Because of the fear that's underneath drives the cortisol, and when we can't self-regulate by merely closing our eyes and turning inward and taking a breath and feeling the presence, and when we have to do something. So we self-medicate. We are taking care of ourselves. What do we do to bring our cortisol down? We can take the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. It's offered free online. It's called PalouseMindfulness.com. And at week 5, you need to do all the weeks prior to prepare for week 5. Week 5 has the turning toward meditation. You can't run from your fear. You have to take a breath and face it. But you need to face it by befriending it, not by being scared to death, and not by re-experiencing it, because re-experiencing it is going to drive your cortisol up, and we want to bring your cortisol down. We have to learn to face our fear without overwhelm and without re-experiencing, and that's what week 5 is about. All addicts breathe fast. And that is because when you have high cortisol and you have fear, you're in a state called sympathetic. The sympathetic state is fight, flight, freeze. And so you're going to be in a state of anxiety, of scarcity, of lack. And as a result, your heart is going to beat faster and you're going to breathe faster. That is one way that we can intercept into the vagal nerve system and calm and soothe ourselves. So we can learn a variety of breathing practices, and you can get an app that goes on your phone that you clip. Part of it clips to your ear, and then you have the part that's on your phone, and you can measure the heart rate variability. That's the space between the thump. So as you regulate your breath, you regulate your heart rate. When you regulate your heart rate, you increase serotonin, and you're in a different state of mind. And you need to learn a variety of breathing techniques, because you need to be able to self-regulate wherever you are, whatever is happening. And if you get triggered, you're having a panic attack, you can't breathe the same way. If you're in a meeting or wherever you are, you've got to be able to have a self-practice that you can put into place to take care of you then and there. A body scan. When you have the brain that you can't close your eyes and just take a breath and be in a good place, you can intervene by doing a body scan. Now, the vagal nerve, we have learned through the work of Stephen Porges. What I learned from Stephen Porges is that the vagal nerve works 2 ways, and that was radical in 1990. And it turns out that 80% of the messages in your body are afferent, going from the body to the brain. And 20% go from the brain to the body. So if you want to impact your cortisol and you can't meditate, what do? You learn to relax your body. And so body scans are part of the mindfulness-based stress reduction course. There are, I think, 162,000 meditations on the app that I use called Insight Timer. And you can find meditations for trauma, body scans for breathing, body scans for PTSD. You just put it in the search bar and you'll get a whole long list of the people there's somebody in the world is an expert on that type of meditation. Real food doesn't have an ingredient list. So if you want to know what to eat something that doesn't have an ingredient list. Eat as much real food as you like. You do not want to go into caloric restriction, because caloric restriction does what? It puts you into scarcity and lack and makes your cortisol go up. So you want to be able to eat. You need to reduce sugars and added sugars as much as humanly possible. Restore the gut biome. We need to stop snacking. No snacking allowed. You don't eat until you are hungry, and practicing intermittent fasting is really helpful. And that's having a nice long space between your dinner and your breakfast. Learn the foods that promote serotonin production in the gut and the foods that deplete serotonin in the gut. I have a list from Robert Lustig's Fat Chance. It's the book that's up here. Beating the Odds Against Sugar, Processed Food, Obesity, and Disease. And I will be delighted to share you the list. All you have to do is send me an email to Diana@Restore Wellness Center, and that's center with an RE.com, and I will send you the list from Robert Lustig's books on the foods to eat and the foods to avoid. Avoid caffeine and hydrate, drinking at least 8 glasses of water and a glass before every single meal, because it will help how you digest your food. Get enough sleep. Wearable technology helps you figure out if you are getting REM and deep sleep, and these are essential for regulating and lowering the cortisol. The angel hours are from 10 p.m. to midnight. If you lose 10 p.m. to midnight, you're not likely to get the deep sleep that you need to clean your brain. And if you want to avoid Alzheimer's, that's critical. Take up a hobby. Laugh and have lots of fun. Aerobics is the preferred exercise. And if you can find something that you enjoy, that's even better, because that helps create even more serotonin. You want to avoid high interval training, because high interval training creates dopamine, and you're trying to bring yourself back to balance, so you need serotonin. So that's light aerobic activity to regulate the breath and make you comfortable, and hopefully socialize with things like line dance, country western dancing, and learn social skills. If you are struggling with dopamine behaviors and addiction, you haven't learned the social skills that make relationships safe. A way to learn these social skills is to join a CODA, Codependence Anonymous 12-step meeting. And thank you to the board. Be moving the 12-step group to Unity, and our meetings are scheduled 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. Identify your green light, yellow light, and red light, not only your foods, but your behaviors. And there are signs. You make your red light, yellow light, and green light behaviors so that you know when you're starting to slip on the slippery slope. Get a pet. Stop smoking and avoid any other dopamine-stimulating activities, because you will be in danger of crossing your addiction. I can't tell you how many of clients that have come to the clinic who were alcoholics who are now obese. They don't come for obesity, they come for depression. And they have major depression when your dopamine goes down from going up and coming down, and when your serotonin goes down, you have major depression. Practice self-binding. And self-binding is not about limitation. It's about recognizing that you are trying to make yourself safe. And it is the road to freedom. You choose what you are dedicating yourself to, and you learn to say no to the things that don't support you. Talk to your doctor and get some lab work. Your depression might be that you have a low thyroid. It could be that you have low vitamin D. It could be a lot of things. Also, you want a benchmark to measure your A1C. Since we don't measure insulin, this helps us kind of figure out things. Also ask about supplements, omega-3 and adaptogens. Adaptogens are plants that grow in harsh environments like the tops of mountains. They get strong radiation and they endure harsh cold, and they impart that strength to us. Never make a change without consulting your doctor. Do not ever go off your medication if guidance, because it can really make things bad. Most important of all, develop a gratitude practice and learn spiritual optimism. So I began learning these skills in 1997 when I joined Unity in Dallas. We welcome anyone into this community who is on that path of wanting to and seeking a better life.